to the Neurodive Corner. My name is Sheila, and I am your host. And this is your corner for all things neurodivergent and the amazing people that care for them. So, it's been a while since I do a live. So, we'll give some time as people jump in and join us little by little if they want to. Yeah, we're definitely gonna give everybody some time to join in today's live and join us for a chat for a little bit. So I know everybody is probably either um, cursing somebody out because they got caught on April's Fools, or um, you're the one that got everybody on April's Fool. Because there's two types of people, I promise you. Um, there's the type that, you know, are good at getting everybody, and there's the people like me that are a little naive and it just goes over your head. So, yeah. So I wonder how everybody's April's Fool it's going. I mean, we gotta try and have joy with and find joy in whatever we can, right? That's the way I'm looking at everything lately. I'm just kind of looking at it through that filter that we have to find joy in the little things. So yeah, that's where we're at, especially in our country. So anyway, so today is April 1st, and although for everybody is April's Fool, for social workers, especially those that work in child protective services, today is the start of Child Abuse Prevention Month. So yes, throughout the whole month of April, if you pay attention in your community, your Department of Health and Human Services. Hi, Nick. Hi, thank you for joining the live. Make sure that you short. Thank you, everybody that's joining the live. Make sure you sound off on the chat. Let us know where you're watching from, where you're joining us from. I always love interacting with you guys. It keeps everything more interesting. Hi, Jolyn Marsh. Hi, thank you for joining. Thank you. You guys are the our two top fans tonight. So thank you so much for joining the live. And I was just kind of like going over the fact that April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, right? So those of us that are in social work have a little bit of a soft spot for April because of that. It is a month that highlights that it takes a village. And a lot of the times, people ask, well, how come you guys didn't do this? Or how come? Well, it takes a village. It takes that one person to pick up the phone and voice the concern, and it takes the grandmother, it takes the auntie, it takes the teacher, it takes the coach to show up for these children. So that's the way that I kind of like look at it anymore. So one of the things, right, in our channel that is kind of like dedicated to neurodivergent people, one of the main things has always been to me is the pro-life crowd, right? You know, you have a lot of people out there just kind of like pounding their chest on the pro-life movement, but you never see them talk about this particular group of children that are in foster care. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about ACEs, which are adverse early childhood events. We're going to talk about how it shows up in children, how it impacts development, and, what we can do whenever we see these signs, whether it is in your children or children that you care for, right? So again, ACEs is kind of like early trauma, if you will. Again, it's called adverse childhood experiences. And those of you that are in in social work are going to be very familiar with that term because it's something that we use as a tool as well when we are evaluating imminent risk, imminent safety, case planning, all of that, right? So the issue with ACEs, right, is that potentially traumatic events occurring before the age of 18. That's why it's early. They can range from direct abuse to living with a family member that is struggling with a substance use disorder, right? So any of those things falls into that category of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences or just traumatic experiences for short and for the remainder of the video. And a lot of the times people, Nix, Nix, I'm not really sure. What do you mean, like rate Skittles? Like how much I like them? I used to love Skittles. I would have put them up there at an 8, but lately not into candy as much. So there goes that tidbit of information. Hi, Christina Williams. Thank you for joining the live. I appreciate you. Make sure that you all guys do all the cool stuff. Hit the like, hit subscribe. Make sure you guys keep commenting, interacting with the video. It helps the channel. It helps the algorithm. It helps the right people find the right information. So again, a lot of the times we think that there are no signs of trauma in early childhood development, or they're difficult to pinpoint, or a lot of people just plain think that children are too young and not necessarily remember trauma, which they are correct to an extent. Trauma can Memory can become selective as a coping mechanism. So let's talk a little bit about the early signs. So early signs are not always obvious, especially when we're talking about infants, toddlers, right? It might look more like developmental delays. And this is where it gets hairy because it can look, um, say, like autism spectrum disorder, or, it can look like O- ODD, it could look like OCD. So it depends, right? It depends on the age group that you're looking at. But when it's very early childhood, it can come across as a developmental delay, like speech impediment, things like that. So it again, in older kids, it can look a little bit different. In older kids, we can see more of that withdrawing, or hypervigilance, emotional outbursts, kind of like emotions that don't match the trigger, if you will, or reactions that are outsized for the stimuli and the trigger. And all of these in early childhood can be a sign that something traumatic has happened or is happening and taking place. And in foster care, this is particularly important because a label and a diagnosis can make all the difference in terms of placement and what supports and interventions you're getting a child or a family or foster parents. A lot of the time, foster parents don't get a whole lot of transparency and information as it is. And parents that deal with children that are disabled, even more so. So, why does this happen, right? The ACEs, the adverse childhood events. So we don't know specifically why, but we know that it triggers toxic stress. And without a supportive adult or a supportive adults around a child that's experiencing trauma, the child's brain stays in a constant fight, flight, fawn, or freeze mode. So whenever you see a child that looks like, let's I'm going to talk about hypervigilance because that is one that with being withdrawn is kind of obvious for most adults when they're interacting with children, right? You know, when you see a child that is kind of like to the corner, withdrawn, kind of like doesn't want to play, doesn't want to interact, that kind of gets more attention. However, the child that is hyper vigilant and is people pleasing, that is the child that is usually falling through the cracks, especially when we're talking about foster care, because these are children that have learned that people pleasing is a very effective survival mechanism. So a lot of the time, trauma signs will look like something totally different. And you might be thinking that, oh my God, this child is ADHD, this child is incredibly hyperactive, this child is very defiant. And what's really happening is you're seeing a trauma response. You're seeing an adverse childhood event or the response to an adverse childhood event. So when a child's brain is constantly in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, it starts creating chronic stress. And this floods the body with, we know, all of the bad hormones, or not necessarily bad, but all of the hormones that kind of like trigger your response, that fight or flight response. And eventually, if you are on chronic stress, especially the brain of a child that is developing, if if they are in a constant state of survival or of having to adapt and read the room, as people might say, very quickly in order to know how to react and stay safe, eventually they are kind of immune to emotion. Their system just kind of like stops. And obviously, this can impact not only cognitive things, but it can also impact the development of the body. I mean, this can actually put stress in the development of the heart, development of the lungs, and things like that. So there's a lot of research that has been done on ACEs, on adverse childhood events, and they show a dose response relationship. So the more adverse events that a child faces, the higher, obviously, it is that they're going to have a chronic illness or a mental health struggle in adulthood. Um, the one thing that we know is that The brain is extremely there's a lot of plasticity to the brain. However, if the brain early on all it knows is to be in fight or flight, those are children that are missing out on socializing and developing those skills. Because again, being in that chronic stress mode does not allow for the other areas of the brain to develop at the same pace. So you're gonna see a lot of things with this, a lot of misdiagnosis with these children. You know, a lot of them would be labeled oppositional defiant, and they are just having traumatic responses that people are overlooking or are not familiar with the symptoms and signs and how stress can look at, on a child. Like, for example, thank you for joining the live. Um, yeah, some people have serious issues, but I gotta love the trolls though. They help the algorithm as well. Hi, Mary Cortman. Thank you for joining the live. Thank you. Appreciate everybody. Thank you that everybody that's jumping. Make sure you all like, subscribe, comment. Let me know where you're joining us from. If you are neurodivergent yourself or know somebody that's neurodivergent, we definitely want to hear from you. So, going back to our theme. So, again, in children, chronic stress is not going to look the same way as it might look in an adult. So I always tell parents, if you start seeing, for example, oversized aggression on that 0 to 3 population, something might be happening there. Or if you start, like I said, you start seeing a lot of like people pleasing and urgency to be perfect in everything and be involved in everything, stay super busy, have a crazy extracurricular calendar, that might be a trauma response just because it looks positive or is perceived as positive doesn't take away that is a trauma response. So I think that's one of the things that I wanted to bring today to start again. You know, child prevention, child abuse prevention month. So I wanted to come and talk a little bit about how trauma may look in children. Uh, Another red flag that parents don't pay attention. If you have a child that is constantly having pains, the growing pains, like this intractable pain somewhere in their body, whether it's headaches, whether it's their stomach, whether it's that, could definitely be a trauma response. That can be a child that is experiencing adverse childhood events. So again, we have to pay close attention to children. Trauma is always expressed in a spectrum, I feel, and when it comes to children, it could be even more tricky because it could be very all or nothing, you know. It could be the child that, again, that is completely high achieving and everybody thinks has their shit together, and they are actually just surviving and hanging by a thread. They're just hyper functioning. Or it could be the withdrawn child that, you know, is not socializing, is not interacting, and kind of like has checked out completely because they have learned that becoming small and becoming kind of like invisible is what actually feels and keeps them safe. So again, To everybody that joined the live today, thank you so much. Thank you for your continued support to this small community. Please share us with your friends, and make sure that you wear blue throughout April, celebrating or not celebrating, creating awareness for Child Abuse Prevention Month. So, thank you, everybody. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep lifting each other up. Bye bye.